I was sitting in the lobby of Halbrook Financial, smoothing invisible wrinkles from my navy blazer, trying to slow my breathing while staring at the glass doors that reflected a distorted version of me, someone who looked far more confident than I felt. The receptionist had just smiled politely and said, "They're finishing up your background verification. Should only be a few minutes." Background verification. Those two words always felt heavier than they should. I kept telling myself this time would be different. This job mattered more than the others. It wasn't just another temporary position or a low-level assistant role. It was an operations coordinator position with full benefits, stability, and growth. I had spent years building towards something like this, stacking certifications, taking night classes, rebuilding my credit, moving cities twice just to escape the shadow that followed me like a rumor that refused to die. My phone buzzed in my purse, and my stomach instantly tightened. I didn't even need to check who it was. I already knew the pattern. Every time something good was about to happen, something else would follow. Still, I pulled it out. Unknown number. I hesitated, my thumb hovering over the screen. For a second, I considered ignoring it. I almost did. But then the call went silent, and immediately a voicemail notification popped up. I stared at it, feeling that old, cold sensation crawl up my spine, the one I learned to recognize years ago, the feeling that something was about to collapse before I even understood what it was. I pressed play, holding the phone to my ear while pretending to scroll through emails so I wouldn't look as nervous as I felt. A woman's voice spoke, professional, careful. "Hi, this is Denise from Halbrook HR. We just needed clarification regarding a call we received about your employment history. Please come back to the second-floor conference room when you get this message." My chest tightened so fast it almost hurt. Clarification. That word again. It always started with clarification. I swallowed, stood up, and forced my legs to move toward the elevator. The ride up felt longer than it should have been, like time was stretching just to watch me panic. The elevator doors opened with a soft chime, and I walked down the carpeted hallway toward the conference room, my heels barely making sound against the floor. Denise was sitting at the table when I walked in, her laptop open, her posture straight but not aggressive. Across from her sat a man I recognized from the interview panel, Mr. Carter, the regional director. His expression wasn't angry or suspicious. It was worse. It was careful, controlled, like someone trying to step around broken glass without cutting themselves. "Thanks for coming back up, Lily," Denise said, folding her hands together. My throat felt dry. "Of course." She glanced at Mr. Carter, then back at me. "We received a call from someone who identified themselves as your parent. They expressed concerns about your integrity in previous workplaces." There it was. The sentence that had destroyed more opportunities than I could count. My heat rushed into my face, but I forced myself to keep eye contact. "Which parent?" Denise blinked slightly, like she hadn't expected that question. "They didn't specify. They just said they felt obligated to warn us." Of course they didn't specify. They never did. They liked the mystery. It made the accusation feel bigger, heavier, harder to fight. Mr. Carter leaned forward slightly. "They claimed you were terminated from multiple jobs for theft." My hands curled together in my lap so tightly my knuckles hurt. I kept my voice steady, even though every word felt like it was scraping out of my chest. "That isn't true." Denise studied me carefully. "Do you have documentation supporting that?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, I always keep my termination records and performance reviews. You're welcome to see them." Mr. Carter exchanged a glance with Denise, something unreadable passing between them. He nodded once. "Please send them to us. We're not making any decisions today." Not making any decisions today. That meant they were already thinking about one. I left the building 20 minutes later, my chest hollow, my stomach twisting itself into tight, painful knots. The winter air hit my face, sharp and cold, but it barely registered. I walked to my car, sat inside, and gripped the steering wheel while memories I spent years trying to bury started clawing their way back up. The first time it happened, I was 19. I had just landed a part-time job at a boutique clothing store downtown. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved it. I loved the routine, the organization, the way the manager, Carla, used to compliment how quickly I learned inventory systems. For the first time, I felt like I was building something that belonged to me. 3 weeks in, Carla called me into her office, her face pale and tense. "Lily, did you tell your parents where you work?" I remember smiling, confused. "Yeah, why?" She slid a notepad toward me with scribbled notes. "Your mother called this morning. She said you've stolen money from family members before. She said we should watch the register carefully." My ears rang so loudly I barely heard the rest of her words. I remember sitting there, nodding, trying to act calm, while everything inside me shattered like glass dropped on tile. I wasn't fired that day, but 2 weeks later, after a cast drawer came up short by $40 during a shift I wasn't even scheduled for, they let me go. No accusations, no confrontation, just a quiet meeting and a polite, rehearsed apology. It kept happening after that. Restaurants, offices, retail chains, even a daycare center once, which hurt the most because I loved working with kids. Every time I settled in, every time a supervisor started trusting me, someone would call, someone would warn them, and it always traced back to my parents. I never understood why they did it, not completely. I had theories, broken pieces of memory that hinted at jealousy, control, resentment, but nothing ever fully explained how someone could sabotage their own daughter's survival like it was a hobby. My phone buzzed again, snapping me out of the spiral. This time, it wasn't an unknown number. It was my grandmother. I stared at her name on the screen, my chest tightening for an entirely different reason. She rarely called during the day. She preferred texting. I answered quickly. "Grandma?" Her voice came through warm but serious. "They called again, didn't they?" My breath caught. "How did you know?" She sighed softly, the kind of sigh that carried years of patience and quiet anger. "Because your mother called me last night bragging about how she protected another company from your behavior." My hands started shaking so badly I had to put the phone on speaker and grip the steering wheel with both hands. "Why do they do this? I've never—" "I know," she interrupted gently. "You don't have to defend yourself to me, honey." There was a pause, and I could hear paper shuffling on her end of the line. "Listen carefully," she said, her voice dropping lower, steadier. "I told you years ago to keep every document I gave you. Do you still have the envelope in your safe?" My heart started pounding faster. "Yes, but I've never opened it. You said it was only for emergencies." Another pause. "Lily," she said quietly, "this is an emergency." My fingers tightened around the wheel. "What's in it?" "It's protection," she replied. "Something I prepared a long time ago because I knew your parents would eventually go too far." My throat felt like it was closing. "What kind of protection?" She hesitated just long enough to make my pulse spike. "The kind that can destroy their credibility permanently." The air in the car suddenly felt too thin to breathe. "Grandma, what did you do?" "I didn't do anything," she said softly. "I documented everything they did." My stomach dropped. "Every lie they told," she continued, "every phone call they made to your employers, every false police report they tried to file when you were 22. I kept recordings, statements, legal affidavits." I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel, my entire body trembling. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because you weren't ready to fight them yet," she said, "and I was hoping, stupidly, that they'd stop." I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks before I could stop them. "What do I do now?" "I need you to go home," she said firmly. "Open the envelope, then call the attorney whose card is inside. Not tomorrow, not next week, today." I swallowed hard. "Grandma, if I do this, there's no going back, is there?" Her voice softened again, but it carried steel underneath. "They crossed that line years ago, sweetheart. You just refused to see it." I didn't answer. I couldn't. My chest felt like it was being crushed under invisible weight. "Lily," she added quietly, "there's something else in that envelope, something your parents never expected you to have." "What?" I whispered. Her silence stretched just long enough to make my pulse thunder in my ears. "Proof," she finally said, "that what they've been telling people about you isn't just a lie, it's a crime." My breath hitched sharply. The call ended a second later, leaving me sitting in my car, staring at nothing, while the word echoed in my head over and over again. Crime. My hands trembled as I started the engine, my mind racing through every memory, every job I lost, every moment I stood in front of strangers trying to prove I wasn't the person my parents insisted I was. By the time I pulled into my apartment parking lot, my heart was pounding so loudly it felt like it was shaking my ribs. I barely remembered climbing the stairs or unlocking my door. The apartment felt unusually quiet. The title at the top of the second document made my vision blur for a second because my brain refused to process it fast enough. Protective Affidavit and Conditional Trust Authorization. My fingers tightened around the paper as if it might disappear if I loosened my grip. I didn't understand half the legal phrasing at first. The words were dense, heavy, written in that formal language that always felt designed to confuse normal people into signing things they didn't fully understand. But I forced myself to slow down, to breathe, to actually read. My grandmother's name appeared repeatedly. So did mine. And then, my parents' names. I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding in my ears so loudly it almost drowned out the silence in my apartment. The document outlined a series of recorded incidents, notarized witness statements, and legal contingencies triggered by continued and verifiable acts of defamation and intentional interference with employment stability. My throat tightened around that phrase. Intentional interference. I had lived inside those words for years without knowing there was a legal name for what they were doing to me. My phone buzzed beside me on the bed, making me jump. I glanced at the screen, half expecting it to be my mother or father, some twisted instinct bracing me for another ambush. But it wasn't. It was an email notification from Hellbrook Financial. My stomach dropped instantly. My hands hovered over the phone, suddenly afraid to open it. Every part of me wanted to throw the device across the room, to delay whatever confirmation of failure waited behind that notification. But another part of me, the part that had forced me to keep applying for jobs, to keep rebuilding every time my life got knocked down, pushed me forward. I opened the email. "Dear Lily, we are currently placing your application under additional review due to external concerns raised during the background verification process. We will contact you with a final decision within 5 business days." 5 business days. It wasn't a rejection, but it wasn't acceptance either. It was that suffocating middle ground where hope and dread twisted together so tightly I couldn't separate them. I dropped the phone onto the bed and leaned forward, pressing my palms into my eyes until I saw bursts of color behind my eyelids. My chest felt tight, like I had swallowed something sharp that was stuck halfway down. I forced myself to focus back on the envelope. There were more documents inside. Audio transcripts, copies of phone logs, printed screenshots of text messages that made my stomach churn as I recognized my mother's number. She's unstable. She lies about everything. She's stolen from us before. Please watch your inventory. My breath came out shaky as I flipped through page after page of poison disguised as concern. Some of the transcripts dated back nearly a decade. Some included employers I barely remembered, jobs that lasted only weeks before collapsing under accusations that always felt vague enough to avoid legal confrontation, but specific enough to destroy trust. Halfway through the stack, another business card slid loose and fell onto the bedspread. I picked it up slowly. Daniel R. Holloway, Civil Litigation and Employment Defense. My grandmother had written a note on the back in blue ink. Call him when you're ready to stop running. My hands trembled as I traced the letters with my thumb. Ready. That word felt foreign. I wasn't sure if someone ever truly felt ready to take on their own parents in a legal fight that could rip their entire family history apart. A sharp knock at my apartment door made me freeze. Every muscle in my body locked instantly. Another knock followed, louder this time, firm, impatient. My heart started racing as a familiar voice filtered through the door. "Lily, I know you're home. Your car's outside." My father. The sound of his voice sent a cold wave down my spine so fast it almost made my fingers go numb. I stayed perfectly still, barely breathing, hoping, maybe, stupidly, that he would assume I wasn't there. The doorknob rattled. Not aggressively, just enough to remind me of how many times my parents had let themselves into my life without permission, like boundaries were just decorative suggestions. "Open the door," he said, his tone sharp but controlled. My pulse hammered violently against my ribs. My eyes darted to the stack of documents scattered across my bed, then to the envelope still open beside me. Panic clawed at my chest. If he saw these, if he knew what my grandmother had prepared. "Lily," he called again, louder this time, irritation creeping into his voice. "Don't be dramatic." Dramatic. The words sliced through me, familiar and exhausting. I stood slowly, my legs unsteady, and gathered the papers into a messy stack, shoving them back into the envelope with shaking hands. I locked the safe again, my fingers fumbling with the combination twice before the latch finally clicked shut. The knocking came again, sharper now. "I spoke to your employer today," he said through the door. "They seemed concerned." My breath caught in my throat, rage and terror colliding so violently inside my chest that I had to press my hand against the wall to steady myself. "You can't keep lying to people, Lily," he continued, his voice dripping with that same calm disappointment that used to make me feel 10 years old and worthless at the same time. Help. The word made my stomach twist so hard, I thought I might be sick. I walked toward the door slowly, each step feeling heavier than the last. I stopped just inches away from it, staring at the wood like it might split open on its own. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely louder than a whisper. Silence lingered for a moment, then his tone softened slightly, shifting into something almost rehearsed. "We're worried about you, Lily. You've been making questionable choices. Your mother thinks you're being influenced by people who don't have your best interests at heart." I squeezed my eyes shut, my nails digging into my palm. "By people, you mean my grandmother?" Another pause. "She's filled your head with nonsense for years. You don't understand how unstable she's become." My chest tightened painfully. The words hit too close to the pattern I was starting to recognize. Every person who defended me became unstable, dangerous, or manipulative in my parents' version of reality. "You shouldn't be taking legal advice from her," he added, casually, like he was mentioning the weather. My eyes flew open. Ice shot through my veins. "How do you know anything about legal advice?" I asked slowly. The silence on the other side of the door stretched just long enough to make my pulse spike. "We hear things," he said finally, his voice turning colder. "And you need to understand something, Lily. If you try to drag family matters into court, it will get very ugly for you." My throat went dry. "Ugly how?" I asked, whispered against the door. "You don't have the resources to fight us," he replied calmly, "and once people start digging into your past, they're going to find things that won't look good for you." My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. "What things?" I whispered. Another pause. Longer this time, calculated. "You know exactly what things," he said. My hand started shaking again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was anger, a slow, burning anger that had been building under years of humiliation, confusion, and self-doubt. I haven't done anything wrong, I said, my voice trembling but louder now. You believe that, he replied, almost pitying, but belief doesn't change facts. My vision blurred with sudden tears, but I refused to let them fall. I refused to let him hear them in my voice. Go home, I said, barely recognizing my own tone. Lily, go home, I repeated, louder this time. The hallway outside my apartment went silent. For a second, I thought he might keep arguing, might start pounding on the door, might say something that would shatter whatever fragile control I was clinging to. Instead, I heard his footsteps retreat slowly down the hallway. I stayed frozen against the door long after the building fell quiet again. My legs finally gave out, and I slid down until I was sitting on the floor, my back pressed against the wood, my chest heaving with uneven breaths. My phone buzzed again beside me, vibrating across the hardwood floor. I stared at it, too drained to move. It buzzed again, and again. Finally, I picked it up. It wasn't my grandmother. It was a text from an unknown number. My stomach dropped as I opened it. You should check your email. Someone just sent your new employer some very interesting documents about you. My heart stopped for a split second before slamming violently back to life. Another message appeared before I could even process the first. Let's see how long this job lasts. My hand started shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone as panic surged through my chest, suffocating and electric all at once. I scrambled to open my email, my vision swimming as the inbox loaded. There was a new message from Halbrook Financial HR, and another attachment from an